Hi, I'm Dr. Paul Jenkins, a child and family psychologist.
And I'm Vicki Jenkins, a speech-language pathologist. You know, over the last 3 decades, we have helped thousands of single parents like you, and we want to help you know how to bring more peace and be more comfortable with this role that you have as a single parent. And we've got 4 simple rules to help you get there.
First of all, wow. This is a huge job for a team. And if you're doing it yourself, our hats just go off to you for that. Thank you for the kind, loving service that you're providing as you raise your kids. This is not an easy thing. We just wanted to acknowledge that up front.
So, that being said, rule number 1 is take care of yourself. And I think this is particularly challenging at times for a single parent.
Yeah, well, it's challenging for any
It's hard
parent.
for all parents, right?
That's why we wanted to make that an acknowledgement up front, because when you're doing this on your own, it can be enormously difficult to identify, well, how am I going to take care of myself?
Right.
Because I've got to take care of everybody else. I keep remembering this mom who came to see me years ago, and I gave her a little assignment. I gave her a pad and a pen, and I said, write down everything and everyone that you're responsible for. And she starts writing. I mean, she's going fast and furious, and she turns the page, okay? And she's going on to page 2. I think she got on to page 3. She starts slowing down. Okay, well, that's all I can think of. Guess who was missing?
Her very self.
Yeah, and who's going to take care of it? Who's going to take care of you? Are we going to expect your kids to do that? So here's a little mental trick, okay? How am I going to do that? Needs to be a question, not a statement disguised as a question. Because sometimes we'll throw our hands in the air. Well, how am I going to do that? It's not even a question.
It's a statement. That's impossible.
Yeah, turn it back into a question and invite your brain to start thinking about that. Some of the other rules are going to help with that. Just remember how important it is and whatever it takes. So if you need to engage the neighbor teenage girl to come over and sit with your baby for an hour while you go do a workout, or just have a little bit of mommy time, or if you need to have some help that way, whatever it takes, you've got to take care of yourself. Rule number 2, take care of the team.
Now, just because you're a single mom does not mean you don't have a team. Matter of fact,
Right.
more than ever, you need to build a team around you.
And use them.
Right.
Put them to work. Hey, we're on your team.
Right.
We're on your team. And hopefully you feel that from us. We're working for you. There are other people that you can engage on your team, whether it's extended family or people in your community or at the church or in your neighborhood,
Good
or
friends,
nannies
whatever.
or babysitters or
Right.
coaches or consultants. You have a team, put them to work for you.
Be creative. It doesn't have to be conventional, the team that you put together. It does need to be a team that you can consult with, that you can rely on, and that will help you in your job, which is loving your child.
As you expand and use your team in creative ways, it gives them opportunities to serve. And that's important to their mental health. So maybe you're doing them a favor by having them on your team.
Right. Rule number 3 seems kind of like a no-brainer. It is love your child or your children.
It should go without saying,
Right.
right? But really, we're listing this very explicitly because that is your number 1 job.
Yeah, especially I would think as a single parent, sometimes we get in the trap that now I have to be everyone for this child and I have to do everything for this child and all that. There's some truth to that in some ways, but really your job has not changed whether you're single or married. Your job is to love your child no matter what and even if, and you can and need to do this as a single parent.
What is your job? Now think about that for a minute. When I ask parents this, in the office or in the trainings that we do, I get some pretty good answers. Like,
Make sure they're responsible adults and citizens in the world.
that's my job as a parent.
I
I
hear
need
that
to
one a
make
lot.
sure that this person grows up to be a responsible, contributing citizen. Okay, pretty good answer. To make sure that they fulfill their potential.
Make sure they finish school.
Yeah, make sure that they do their chores.
Right.
Make sure they don't neglect their schoolwork or their other work. Okay, good answers. Good answers, but those answers get us into trouble. And if you had some of those answers, welcome to the earth. Well, that's kind of how we think as parents. I want to suggest a little shift. Your job as a parent is to love them, no matter what, and even if.
Even when they really, really, really disappoint you?
You said even when. Oh, it's not an if thing. Okay, so even when they disappoint, yes. And have they? Have they disappointed you? And do you still love them? Oh, good. That means you're doing your job as a parent. Even if they hate you.
And how about that's even when they hate you?
Or when they hate you. I don't think they ever truly hate you.
No.
If you're setting appropriate limits, then your children will have experiences of anger and rage, okay, as they respond to those limit settings. Even if they hate you, yeah, your job is still to love them. Even if they get arrested and hauled off to jail. Yeah.
And even if they make choices that removes them from your home, you can still love them.
Right. No matter what and even if. Try that on for just a minute, because as you accept that as your job, your main job as a parent, look what happens.
I'm doing all right.
You're actually doing your job. And you can do your job. That is so important because it helps you to accomplish all of the other suggestions that we've given you here today, like detaching from the outcomes.
Right.
That is huge. If you don't get anything else from this video, please put that in your notes somewhere, write it on your bathroom mirror, hang it as a little dangly in your car, so that you can always see my job is to love them, no matter what. And that leads us right into rule number 4. Use effective discipline.
And that's a key word right there, effective. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But I think that sometimes I've seen it happen before where everything is so overwhelming and there's so many things that you have to do and a lot of times say no to, that we worry that our children won't feel loved or something if we discipline as well. But the research, I mean, you have researched this so much as a psychologist.
Yeah. Yes, the research is really consistent that kids need 2 things to be healthy and well-adjusted. And this goes back as far as we've been doing research in the field of psychology. They need to have love and they need to have discipline.
Right.
And different studies use different words for each of those. It might show up as structure or appropriate connection or whatever, but it boils down to that, love and discipline. Now, when we talked about effective discipline earlier, okay, and you mentioned this, Vicki, that's a key word there.
Right.
Because sometimes discipline gets to be really ineffective when we're trying to apply discipline that's appropriate for a more mature child to one that's less mature. And the number one thing is to understand maturity.
Right.
Now, when I say maturity, there's a lot of things that go into maturity, and age is only one of those things.
Right.
So let's dig into the maturity just a little bit to illustrate this. How mature is a 13-year-old? Trick question.
Right.
Because you might have a 13-year-old who is staying on top of their schoolwork, doing their chores with a good attitude, treating their sister with respect.
You might.
Or you might have a 13-year-old
that's sullen and angry and slams the door all of the time.
sneaking out at night and doing drugs and having sex. If you understand that there are 3 stages, okay? Stage 1, selfish, immature, yelling and screaming, not cooperating with anything. You get the picture. Throwing tantrums. Stage 2, cooperating, negotiating, working with you.
Maybe he still has an attitude about
Come up with a
things.
win-win
Yeah.
solution. Okay, maybe some attitude, but at least they'll cooperate.
Right.
Stage 3,
Doing their chores without being told.
Without being told, offering to do yours for you. Okay. So, and I overemphasize that a little bit just to make the point. But if we've got these 3 stages, if your teen is on stage 1, we're going to parent them much differently than if your teen is on stage 2. And I don't care if they're 13, 15, 18, or 23. They could be at any of those stages of moral development. So that is so important to understand. How much control you take as a parent is determined by how much maturity your teen has.
And that's going to affect the type of parenting that you show up with, because you're going to change. Your parenting is in for a big change as they become teenagers. And so you're going to learn some of the ways to give and take as they're ready to receive or let go.
I actually grew up in an agricultural community. In this town, we had a lot of livestock. The cows, when they're put into a field, are kind of weird because they want to test the limits. Does this sound familiar? In fact, if you put a cow into a new field that it hasn't been in before, it's going to go around the fence line of that field, all the way around the perimeter of that field. And it pushes up against the fence with its head, tries to get its nose under there. It's looking around to see if there are any holes. And if there's a hole, that cow just goes right through the hole. And it doesn't even care if there's a canal or a freeway or a ditch on the other side. It just wants to go through the hole. Now, if it gets all the way around that field and tests all those fences and finds that they hold, that they're firm, then it's perfectly content to go out in the middle of the field and graze or chew its cud or whatever cows do after testing the fences. And I've noticed this about kids. We set limits with our kids. What do? Boom! They're pounding up against it. They're trying to see if there's a hole. And if there's a hole, they'll blow right through it. But if those fences hold, your kids are completely content to live within those limits, even if they don't like them. I think kids need to know that they're safe. And because they're little kids, they can't keep themselves safe. So they need big people in their world who are able and willing to set appropriate limits. Be consistent. And I mean be consistent in the consequences. Follow through every time. The more consistent you can be, the more your words become gold instead of garbage. If you're not consistent, your kids are going to hear you say, if you do that, then this will happen. And they'll be like, blah, 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 whatever. Because they don't believe you if you're not consistent. If you're consistent, you will say, if you do this, then this will happen. And they'll be like, what? What did Mom say? So far, we have be clear, be consistent, and be kind. That's number 3. Be kind in the delivery. The thing that damages kids sometimes about setting limits is that parents get all out of control and upset and red-faced and way too loud. Be kind. Calm it down. Keep a smile. Calm voice, calm face, calm body as you deliver the limits. That's going to help your kids live within the fences that you're setting up and make life a whole lot easier.
Are you a parent who feels stressed early in the morning? Let's face it, if you have children, then your mornings are probably hectic and full of action. But this doesn't have to be the case. You have the power to make mornings a bit easier on yourself. How, you ask? By adding a little structure to what your children do in the morning. If you create a morning routine for your kids, then you will reduce a lot of the stress and anxiety that happens throughout the day. Why are morning routines important for your kids? To start, let's talk about 5 reasons you should create a morning routine for your children. 1. It creates an increased sense of confidence and independence in your child. Your children will feel good about themselves knowing they can do some of the things you normally would do for them. 2. It gives them greater self-control. Your child will learn to appreciate the work-play balance, understand certain things need to happen before they can have fun and relax. 3. It reduces stress. By knowing what is expected of them ahead of time, children will often feel less anxiety and worry. 4. It teaches them healthy, lifelong habits. 5. It instills a sense of appreciation for what you do. By assigning your children certain responsibilities, you are guiding them towards a greater sense of appreciation for all that you do. Thus, they will be less likely to take you for granted later in life. Now let's go over the 6-step process for creating a morning routine. Step number 1. Making a list of your daily responsibilities. Starting with Monday, make a list of everything you typically do each day. Things like make breakfast, pack lunches, drive kids to school, make dinner, laundry, soccer practice, piano lessons, Girl Scout meeting, work report due. A good rule of thumb is this. If it's a typical daily chore, aka a mom-dad thing, or if it's on your daily or weekly calendar, list it here. Then repeat this process for each day of the week. Once you have the list in front of you, check off the morning relevant items you think your child could handle. Step number 2. Know your audience. You should keep your child's age and abilities in mind when assigning chores. The last thing you want is for your child to feel as if a task is daunting. This will only create resistance on their end and stress on yours. For instance, don't ask a kindergarten-age child to pack their own lunch. Instead, give them the responsibility of packing their snack from an approved snack drawer. You also need to keep a balance between the amount of life skill items on the list versus chore items. Life skill items include things such as go to the bathroom before the bus comes, wash your hands, brush your teeth, comb your hair, put your shoes on. Chore items are those that will help you out, such as make breakfast, get dressed, pack your backpack, make your bed. Step number 3. Give a purpose to the morning routine. Categorizing the morning routine chart can help children feel a bit more independent, especially those children between the ages of 5 and 11 years old. You can ask them to come up with items, or choose from a list you made, that they think should go into each section. This method will give children the opportunity to make a connection between their actions on various aspects of their life. Let's be realistic. If you're the parent of a tween or teen, then you will face some resistance when you spring a morning routine chart on them. If not resistance, you'll definitely witness an eyeball roll or two. You see, most kids between the ages of 11 and 17 typically need to be told what to do. Unlike younger children who yearn to feel grown up, this age group actually thinks they are grown up, and that means they need a reality check. They are living in your house and must do their part. Straightforward, customizable charts typically work best for older kids. They can even hang them in their rooms should they choose. Each night, you can have a discussion with your child about the next day's priorities and assign tasks accordingly. Items such as pack your swim bag or prep an after-school snack would be a great fit for their morning routine. It also helps eliminate any surprises, which is great for kids who have a tendency to be anxious. Step number 5. Consider the when-then method to cut back on resistance. In a nutshell, when-then is simply phrasing a demand that you have of your child in a way that keeps it almost closed-ended. For example, instead of harping on them to clean up their room, you would calmly say, "When you clean your room, then you may watch television for 30 minutes." When-then is not you telling them to do something now, or throwing out empty threats of punishment. It is you merely stating a fact. If they want something, then they need to do something. So how does this apply to a morning routine for kids? On the top of giving them a morning routine chart, write, "When you do these things each morning, then you get XX after school." XX could be technology time. It could be a special snack, or their choice for dinner. Maybe they want to stay up 15 minutes past their bedtime. Whatever works for your child is the perfect reward for a when-then statement. And if they don't finish all of their morning duties, they simply don't get the reward. Step number 6. Make it a team effort. It is human nature to question authority at times. And when you're a child, we as parents are the authority. We play a pivotal role in dictating what our kids do, how they dress, what they eat, where they go, who they are friends with. The list goes on. So naturally, there will be times, likely many of them, when our children demand reasons for our actions and our rules. They will also call us unfair more times than we can count. Let your child know that you are not merely dictating or delegating, but rather asking them to do their part in managing the house. And in doing their part, you will have more time to focus on quality time with them, whether that means watching a family movie together or cooking their favorite meal. Think about it. If you didn't have to spend an hour each day folding laundry, you'd be able to spend some of that time coaching their recreational basketball team. You will also be less stressed, which will result in less nagging and yelling. Routines are a part of life. So it's important to teach your kids the values of contribution, responsibility, and punctuality. This will make them better people and equip them for adulthood and what will be expected from them in life.
Natural and logical consequences are the way to go. I'm a big fan of natural and logical consequences. Usually those happen without our intervention. In other words, they are the consequences that our kids are going to have whether or not we do anything. This puts us in position as a parent to simply get out of the way. Don't interfere with the natural and logical consequences that are going to happen anyway. For example, you might have a child who forgets to take in his homework. Do you need to do something as a consequence for that? Probably not, because if he didn't take in his homework, he's probably going to get a bad grade. Well, parents sometimes don't want their kids to get bad grades, and so they jump in and intervene with that natural and logical consequence. One of the things we can do that's really effective as a parent is to simply get out of the way and stop interfering with the natural and logical consequences that our children are going to get.
It is natural to want to protect our children, but if we don't allow them to learn naturally through consequences, they won't build resilience to cope with failure. Are you comfortable allowing your child to fail?
Obviously, some of the natural and logical consequences are A, way too expensive for us to tolerate as a parent, or B, too far in the future to have a real powerful learning effect on our kids. So we get to come up with consequences for our children in order to create learning opportunities for them. As we create these consequences, it's really important to notice that there are two kinds of consequences. The kind that require cooperation and the kind that don't require cooperation. Why is that important? Because moral development models tell us that children, as they progress through their moral development, start at a place where they're very selfish and self-centered. It's all very demanding or manipulative because they want to get what they want, regardless of how that impacts other people. They're not willing to cooperate at that stage of development. That's why it's about stage, not age. Whether they're an infant or a 17-year-old is not as important as what stage of development are they in. A lot of the parents that I talk to are trying to rack their brain and get creative about what kinds of consequences they can use with their kids. The kind of consequences that don't require cooperation have to come down to, what do you as a parent control? What can you enforce 100% whether or not your kids are on board with it? So pull out a piece of paper or get out your device and let's make a list right now of things that you control, because that's going to be on this important list. So when we make our list, let's get you started. What do you control? What can you enforce 100%? What you provide. Put it on your list. And let's talk about what you provide. You provide access. Put it on the list. I seriously want you to make a physical list, because this is what you can go back to when you're wondering, what kind of consequences can I come up with? These are the ones. Access. Access to what? Access to space. Access to goodies. Access to electricity. Access to devices. Do you see where we're going? You provide access to all these things. What else do you provide? You provide services, taxi services, cook services, laundry services. List some services that you provide. And most of those aren't on the freebies list, are they? What else do you provide? Telecommunications. Especially for teenagers, this is a big deal. They love to have their devices, and they love to have those devices connected to the internet service that you are providing. You provide transportation. Well, that's pretty useful, especially if your kids want to go somewhere. You provide utilities. This was a big eye-opener to me when I realized, wait a minute, I'm buying the electricity in this house. You provide permission. A lot of parents don't realize the power of this particular item on the list. When our kids want to do something, they also want to do it with our permission. I remember my son asking me once, Dad, can I go to this party? And I asked my fatherly question, tell me more about the party. He hadn't given me much information. He told me more. I felt uncomfortable with him going. So can I go, Dad? Son, it's up to you, but I'm not giving you my permission. So if you go, you're going without my permission. So can I go or not? I already said, it's up to you. But if you go, you're going without my permission. My son didn't want to go without my permission. He knew that that would result in consequences that he didn't want to have. So he made a pretty good choice and chose not to go. Permission, powerful thing that you provide. I hope that gets you thinking about the power of this particular list. When we're making a list of consequences that do not require cooperation, all I want you to think about is, what do I control? What can I enforce 100%? And hopefully I got that going for you a little bit.
If we can not tie our mood and our outcome and our happiness or our displeasure to their outcomes, that you know, if we can be a little bit emotionally detached so that they can own their own emotions, we can model how to own your own emotions, because remember, they're still watching you. You're still their parent. And one of the best ways to parent is to be an example of what you want them to be. Because how many times do we end up kind of mirroring their behavior, their attitude, their whatever, and so suddenly we're not teaching anymore, and we're just in a fight with them.
Right. So the short version of this is, you get to take care of you. Mm-hmm. You're the one who is responsible for your emotions, regardless of what's going on. This is easy to say. It's not easy to do. If your teen just got arrested for illegal behavior, how's your mood going to be? Okay. And that's maybe a good example, because you don't get to control whether your teen is arrested for illegal behavior or not. You get to control how you respond to that. You can take care of you.
You take ownership of how you're feeling, and then you show up to help your child navigate whatever they've created.
During all those years that I was doing child custody evaluations, the most heart-rending thing about that was how it affected the kids. And you know that separation and divorce is going to affect your kids. We can't get away from that. How can we help them to cope with that? Let's educate ourselves first. And I think this is the number one thing. You need to understand what it is about divorce that affects kids. This is what we have found through the research to be what affects children in a divorce situation. Do everything that you can to minimize the conflict, first of all. And usually that means conflict between the parents about the kids. So you can see that if you get into a custody dispute, wow, that's going to be really tough for your kids. But this is something that parents need to know. So a child's world, when mom and dad are together and everybody's happy at home, is very circumscribed, kind of like this circle, where everything is contained in this tight little unit. And it's not that complicated. When parents separate, that child's world also separates. So now I'm looking at this as two different areas of this child's world. And we could label this mom's world. And we could label this one dad's world. And they are very different. And there's usually a lot of good reasons why these parents aren't together anymore. You know this, right? There's reasons why the separation or the divorce happened. For the child, they don't have all of those same issues and concerns that the parents have. But what they experience is that their world just separated. It's like those two cells that divide in biology, right? But they're not completely separate, because this part in the middle is where the child lives. That child shares elements and components of both of those worlds. Now this is different depending on whatever your particular arrangement is, obviously. But for the most part, this child's world continues to be somewhere in between or shared with both mom's world and dad's world. Now, this helps us to understand why it is so darn important that we minimize the conflict. Let's say that mom's world and dad's world are having this battle with each other. And they're firing away and they're just fighting and conflicted about what? Well, about the child. And that child is right in the middle. Look, where's not a safe place to be right now? In between these two, right? That's why it's so important to minimize the conflict. The best thing you can do to help your child to adjust to a separation or divorce is to take care of that conflict in a way that the child doesn't get caught up in it. And this comes, by the way, from working with hundreds, maybe thousands, I haven't counted, but for years as I did child custody evaluations and I had a practice that was focused on children and families, I have interviewed hundreds of children about divorce and separation and other conflicts that can come up in a family. Here's what they need to know. It is never the child's fault. And with kids in my office, I really emphasize that. I'll say, it is never the child's fault. And then I ask them, how often is it the child's fault? Never. Yes. And sometimes I emphasize that. Never, ever. Okay, you get the picture, right? They need to understand this because the way that little child's mind is working, they don't always get that. And they think, oh my gosh, if I would have just been a better son, if I would have just been a better daughter, if I were a better boy or a better girl, this wouldn't have happened. Daddy wouldn't have left. Mommy wouldn't have taken us to live with grandma. Whatever, okay? They get this in their little head and it has nothing to do with why mom and dad are separating. They don't get it. So we need to send that message to them. It is never, ever. But this is coming from years of experience in working with these kinds of situations. Nobody knows exactly why this has happened. Now, is that a little puzzling for you to hear? Connect with this for a minute, okay? Nobody knows exactly why this has happened. Why is this an important message to children? Because they sometimes think it's their job to figure out why. this has happened. And that's why they beat themselves up sometimes, or they try to figure out who's right, daddy or mommy. Who's lying to me, mommy or daddy? Well, I am a professional. I've got a PhD, and I was appointed by the court to do these child custody evaluations. The court wants me to figure all this out. I can't figure it out. I get different stories from mom and dad, and it's not that either of them is right or wrong. They are simply different stories. You follow? So it's not about trying to figure out exactly what happened or who's right or who's wrong. I want to take kids out of the loop as fast as we can from that job. It's not their job to figure out who's right or even what's the real version of what has happened here, okay? Mom's got her version, dad's got his version, and that's all they are. Now, if you're mom or dad, you already know that you're right about this, don't you? Yeah, you do. It's a kind of destructive pride, really, that we all have as human beings. And you're not wrong for that. I just want you to be open to something, okay? Just because you know you're right about this doesn't mean that this is exactly the way it is. It is simply your perception. That's a whole other conversation. But trust me on this. Nobody knows exactly why this has happened. Let's take the burden off of our children. You know what? They're always relieved when I tell them that. They are always relieved. I tell them, hey, nobody knows exactly why this has happened. And they're like, oh, really? And they're feeling relieved because they were trying to figure out what happened here. Who's responsible? And both sides are giving them totally different stories about that. It creates a conflict of loyalty for them. We just want to relieve them from that. I want to give you a couple of quick do's and don'ts as well. 2 things that you should try to do. Number 1, create the most sane, stable, loving environment you can in your own world. Most of your concerns are going to be about the other world, right? Yeah, but you don't have any control there. So you solve the problems in your own world. You focus on creating the most sane, stable, loving environment that you possibly can in your own world. That's the best thing you can do for your child. Forget about the other world. Now, the other thing that I would encourage you to do should go without saying. It's your number 1 job as a parent. You love your child. No matter what, and even if. Your job is to love them. And that's easy to do. I've reiterated it here because it's so important to their adjustment and to how they handle all the changes that are happening in the family. So create the most sane, stable, loving environment that you can and love your child. Now let's move on to 2 things that you should not do. Do not make promises for the other parent. This is easy to do because sometimes you're trying to compensate for things that you think your kids are missing out on. Do not promise them that the other parent will do this or will do that or whatever. You don't want to be in that position. That takes a lot of pressure off of you as well. Now the second one, do not blame or badmouth the other parent in any way at all. This is going to be hard, okay? Especially because you know that you're right. Here's the thing. I have a lot of parents who tell me in this kind of a circumstance that they don't blame or talk bad about the other parent in front of the children. Okay, thank you for that. That's a good start. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you get your own heart and mind into a position where that's not even your focus, where that's not even an issue. Because as good of an actor as you can be, your kids are going to pick up on it. If you have a bad, negative attitude about that other parent, it's going to come through. So yes, thank you for not doing it in front of the children. How about we not do it at all? Get back to your own integrity. It's like I talked to you about in the to-do section. You create the most sane, stable, loving environment that you possibly can in your own world. So do not make promises for the other parent, and do not blame or badmouth that other parent.